Love has no age limit. But dating at 70, after 30 years of living alone, that's a journey requiring courage few would dare attempt. The thought alone stirs fear in many hearts. Fear of rejection, fear of being laughed at, fear of appearing desperate or inappropriate. After all, society has quietly taught us that romance belongs to the young, that desire should fade with our youth, and that contentment with solitude is the appropriate companion for our later years. Have you ever wondered what happens to our hearts as we grow older? Does the fear of rejection fade? Does our longing for connection wither with time? Or do these feelings simply go underground, hidden beneath layers of self-protection built over decades of disappointment and loss? Perhaps the most painful question: at what point did we decide that seniors should surrender their right to be seen, desired, and deeply understood by another? Today, I'm sharing a story that challenged everything we think we know about love in our later years. How a first date after 3 decades of widowhood led to revelations so profound they left friends and family speechless. What emerged wasn't just about romance, but about reclaiming parts of ourselves that age and expectation had convinced us to abandon. These insights might just change how you think about your own heart, or the hearts of your parents or grandparents, regardless of where you are in life's journey. Let's begin with that pivotal morning when a 70-year-old woman looked in the mirror and decided that after 30 years, perhaps it wasn't too late after all. Eleanor never planned to go on a date at 70. Not that she had anything against romance. Quite the opposite. She had loved deeply once. A marriage of 22 years to Richard, her college sweetheart and father of her 3 children. But when cancer took him at the age of 45, something inside Eleanor seemed to close up shop. Not just her heart, but her very sense of herself as someone who could be loved romantically again. "I packed that part of myself away," she told me, sitting in her sunlit kitchen 30 years after Richard's passing. "I put it in a box labeled completed and pushed it to the back of my heart's closet. There were children to raise, bills to pay, and a career to build. Who had time for dating?" She wasn't being entirely truthful, of course. We both knew that raising her children had ceased to be all-consuming years ago. Her youngest was now 42 with children of his own. Her career as a librarian had concluded with a modest retirement party 5 years earlier. Time wasn't really the issue. Fear was. The thought of sitting across from a stranger, making small talk, wonder if my neck looked too wrinkled or if I should have worn something more flattering. It was paralyzing, Eleanor admitted. And besides, who would want me? A widow with reading glasses, arthritis in my hands, and memories that sometimes feel more real than the present. This belief that aging had somehow disqualified her from love had calcified over decades until Eleanor accepted it as a simple truth, until her granddaughter Jessica changed everything during a Sunday dinner 6 months ago. "Grandma," Jessica had said while helping clear the dishes, "have you ever thought about dating again?" The question hung in the air between them, so unexpected that Eleanor nearly dropped the casserole dish she was holding. "At my age," Eleanor had laughed, dismissing the idea. "Darling, that's like asking if I considered taking up skydiving." Jessica hadn't laughed along. Instead, she touched her grandmother's arm and said something that would echo in Eleanor's mind for weeks. "Age doesn't exempt you from loneliness, Grandma, and it shouldn't exempt you from joy either." That conversation planted a seed. Eleanor began noticing the silence in her house differently. The empty side of the bed seemed to expand. Meals, for one, felt less practical and more poignant. The idea that it seemed ridiculous gradually transformed into a question. What if it was her friend Margaret who finally pushed her over the edge? Margaret, widowed just 5 years ago, had recently met someone through her church's senior fellowship. He's not Richard. Margaret had said over their monthly lunch. Thank God for that. I had one Richard, and that was enough. Howard is different. He makes me laugh. He listens. And Eleanor, when he holds my hand, I feel like a teenager again, not because I've forgotten my age, but because I've remembered that some parts of us don't age at all. 2 weeks later, Eleanor created a profile on a dating site specifically for seniors. Her hands trembled so badly that she had to retype her information 3 times. Choosing a photo nearly derailed the entire endeavor. Every image seemed to highlight a wrinkle, a sag, evidence of gravity's inevitable victory. Finally, she selected one her daughter had taken at Christmas, where she was laughing at something her grandson had said. It wasn't the most flattering angle, but it was authentically her. Writing about herself proved even harder. What do you say when you're searching for connection after 7 decades of life? How do you distill yourself down to a paragraph? In the end, Eleanor kept it simple. Librarian, mother of 3, grandmother of 5. I love mystery novels, classical music, and walks that don't require special shoes. I've lived enough to know what matters and what doesn't. Looking for companionship with someone who understands that the best conversations happen when you have nothing left to prove. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. Then Robert's message appeared in her inbox. Robert, 73, is a retired high school science teacher. Widowed 8 years ago. 2 children for grandchildren. I've never done this before, he wrote, but your profile made me think we might speak the same language. The days leading up to their coffee date were a blur of anxiety for Eleanor. She changed outfits 7 times. She rehearsed conversation topics while brushing her teeth. She called Jessica twice to cancel, and twice, her granddaughter talked her down from the ledge of fear. What terrifies me most, Eleanor confided to me, wasn't the possibility that he wouldn't like me. It was a possibility that he might. And then what? At our age, beginning something means acknowledging that it will likely end with one of you attending the other's funeral. Is that fair to ask of anyone? Is it fair to ask of myself? These weren't just Eleanor's fears. They're the unspoken barriers that keep so many seniors isolated, even when surrounded by family. The fear that new connections can never match the depth of those built over decades. The fear that physical changes have rendered them undesirable. The terror of vulnerability after loss has taught them how fragile life is. The worry is that children might view dating as a betrayal of a deceased parent's memory. For many, it's simply easier to convince themselves they no longer need a romantic connection, that friendship, family, and community are enough. And those things are vital. But research consistently shows that intimate partnership, the sense of being chosen, desired, and understood by someone who has no obligation to do so, fulfills a unique human need that persists regardless of age. The morning of her date with Robert, Eleanor woke with what she called a teenager's stomach. That fluttery, slightly nauseated feeling of anticipation mixed with dread. She chose a blue blouse her daughter once told her brought out her eyes, a pair of comfortable but flattering slacks, and earrings Richard had given her for their 10th anniversary. The last choice gave her pause. Was it appropriate to wear a gift from her late husband to meet another man? But they were a part of her, just as Richard would always be. Eleanor arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early, a habit from her librarian days. She chose a table near the window, not tucked away in a corner, as if they had something to hide, but not center stage either. When Robert walked in, she recognized him immediately from his profile picture. Tall, slightly stooped, with a full head of silver hair and glasses that magnified kind eyes. I almost walked out twice on the way in, were his first words as he extended his hand. I haven't been this nervous since my teaching evaluation in 1975. With that simple admission, the tension broke. Eleanor laughed. I've been practicing small talk for days. I had a whole opening about the weather prepared. Well, don't waste your preparation, Robert smiled. I'd love to hear about these meteorological observations. For the next 2 hours, over coffee that grew cold because neither remembered to drink it, Eleanor and Robert discovered the strange alchemy that happens when 2 people with 7 decades of life experience truly talk. They skipped the usual first date formalities. There was no posturing, no careful image management. What would be the point? At their age, they had long ago surrendered to who they truly were. Instead, they dove into real conversation. They compared experiences of losing spouses, his to a stroke, hers to cancer. They shared stories of raising children, workplace triumphs and failures, health scares, and private dreams deferred. They debated books and politics without restraint, disagreeing on several points with a refreshing lack of defensiveness. It was like skipping all the preliminary rounds and jumping straight to the championship match, Eleanor explained. There's something incredibly liberating about dating at this age. The stakes feel simultaneously higher and lower. Higher because time is precious. lower because both of us have already survived the worst life could throw at us. When Eleanor shared her date experience with her weekly lunch group, 5 women ranging from 65 to 82, all widowed or divorced, their reactions ranged from scandalized to envious. But what truly shocked them wasn't the details of the date itself, but Eleanor's blunt reflections on what she had discovered about love, desire, and self-worth in her 8th decade. I realized something sitting across from Robert. Eleanor told him, her voice steady despite the flush in her cheeks. For 30 years, I've been carrying this belief that my capacity for romantic love died with Richard. Not just because I loved him, I'll always love him, but because I believe that desire had an expiration date, that at a certain point, a woman becomes irrelevant in that way. Her friend Judith nearly choked on her iced tea. Eleanor Montgomery, are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying that sitting across from Robert, I felt something I hadn't felt in 3 decades. And I'm saying it shocked me to my core. Not just that I could feel attraction again, but that I could be the object of someone else's attraction. That these hands, she held up fingers slightly bent with arthritis, could still be seen as beautiful. That this face, with all its lines and softened edges, could still be looked at with appreciation. The table had gone completely silent. 5 women suspended between discomfort and fascination. Do you know what's truly unforgivable? Eleanor continued, not that society tells us older women are no longer desirable, though that's certainly true. It's that we believe it. We internalize it so completely that we amputate parts of ourselves. We say, well, that chapter is closed, as if desire and connection are luxuries of young rather than fundamental human needs. Robert didn't look at me and see a relic. He saw a woman. And for a few hours, I remembered what it felt like to be seen that way. Margaret, the only one at the table who had dated recently, nodded slowly. When Howard first kissed me, I cried afterward, not from sentiment, from shock. I had convinced myself that part of life was over. Exactly, Eleanor said. But here's what I found most surprising. It's not the same as when we were young. It's deeper somehow. When Robert took my hand as we walked to the car, there was none of that youthful urgency, that desperate need. Instead, there was this profound appreciation. Like we both understood how rare and precious connection is because we felt its absence. The conversation that followed shattered decades of shared silence around intimacy and aging. These women, mothers, grandmothers, professionals, volunteers, pillars of their community, spoke openly for the first time about loneliness that family visits couldn't touch, about missing physical affection that wasn't maternal or platonic, about how invisibility felt like a gradual erasure of self. What Eleanor didn't anticipate was how her simple coffee date would ripple through her broader social circles, revealing attitudes about aging and romance that surprised her. When she mentioned to her son David that she had met someone for coffee, his immediate reaction wasn't curiosity about Robert, but concern about Eleanor's finances. Mom, you barely know this guy. Please tell me you haven't shared any banking information with him, David said during their weekly phone call, his voice tight with worry. Eleanor was momentarily stunned into silence. David, I had coffee with him. I didn't give him power of attorney. Similar reactions came from unexpected quarters. Her bridge partner of 15 years, Catherine, pulled her aside with furrowed brows. Eleanor, I know loneliness can make us vulnerable. Are you certain this man doesn't have ulterior motives? These well-intentioned concerns revealed a painful truth. Many people, even loved ones, struggle to see seniors as complete human beings with the same spectrum of needs and desires as younger adults. Instead, they were viewed primarily through the lens of vulnerability, as potential victims whose pursuit of connection must surely come from desperation rather than normal human longing. It was as if they'd forgotten I'm the same person who raised 3 children, managed a library, and navigated Richard's illness, Eleanor reflected. Suddenly, I was viewed as incapable of making sound judgments about something as basic as having coffee with a man. But not everyone responded with protective concern. Eleanor's daughter Lisa reacted with unexpected delight. Mom, that's wonderful. Tell me everything about him. When Eleanor described the date, Lisa listened with genuine interest, treating her mother's experience with the same respect she would friends. You know, Lisa said afterward. It never occurred to me that you might want to date again. I feel terrible about that. As if I decided your story was already fully written. The most surprising reaction came from Eleanor's 92-year-old neighbor, Harriet. When Eleanor mentioned her date in passing, Harriet laughed so hard she had to sit down. "Oh, honey," she wheezed, wiping her eyes. "You should have seen the scandal when I started seeing George after my Harold passed. My son-in-law actually suggested I might be having cognitive issues. The truth is, people don't want to think about us having hearts that still beat for something besides grandchildren. It makes them uncomfortable. Too bad for them." These varied responses forced Eleanor to confront her own internalized ageism. How often had she herself looked at older couples and thought, "How sweet," in the same patronizing tone one might use about children playing house. How often had she reduced other seniors to one-dimensional figures defined solely by their age rather than their humanity. Her coffee date with Robert expanded into a second date, then a third. They attended a classical music concert, where Robert's hand found hers during Bach's Cello Suite No. 1, his thumb gently stroking her knuckles in time with the music. They walked through botanical gardens, taking frequent bench breaks without embarrassment or apology. They shared meals and stories, and gradually, pieces of their separate lives began to intertwine. Through this unexpected journey, Eleanor discovered 3 essential truths about love and connection in later life. Insights she began sharing openly, despite occasional raised eyebrows. First, she learned that vulnerability never gets easier, but it does get more worthwhile. "At my age," Eleanor explained to her granddaughter Jessica, "I don't have time for superficial connections. Every day is too precious to waste on relationships that don't reach the heart of things." The fear of opening up is still there, but the fear of regret has become greater. This willingness to be vulnerable transformed Eleanor's approach not just to dating, but to all her relationships. She began telling friends and family what they meant to her, instead of assuming they knew. She expressed needs she had previously dismissed as unimportant. She allowed herself to receive care as generously as she gave it. Second, Eleanor discovered that authentic self-acceptance is a foundation for genuine connection. "In my 20s, she reflected, dating was about trying to be what someone else wanted. Now, it's about finding someone who wants exactly who I am. I don't have the energy to pretend, and honestly, what would be the point? At 70, I'm finally comfortable in this skin, loose as it may be in places." This self-acceptance liberated Eleanor. She stopped apologizing for needing reading glasses to see the menu. She mentioned her arthritis matter-of-factly when it affected her mobility. She shared stories of her life, triumphs and regrets alike, without filtering them to create a more perfect narrative. In doing so, she allowed Robert to know her, not an edited version crafted to impress. The third, and perhaps most profound lesson, was about the nature of love itself. Young love burns hot. Eleanor told her increasingly curious lunch group. It's urgent and consuming. It demands forever. But love at this age is like afternoon light instead of blazing noon. It's more patient, more forgiving, more present. It doesn't demand forever. It simply appreciates today. This shift in perspective allowed Eleanor to enjoy her growing relationship with Robert without burdening it with expectations about the future. Each shared moment became valuable for itself, not as a building block towards some distant goal. They discussed their health realities openly. His heart condition, her family history of dementia. These weren't depressing conversations, but practical acknowledgments that allowed them to focus on the richness available now. 6 months after their first date, Robert asked Eleanor if she would consider traveling with him to the Grand Canyon, a place neither had seen. "I've been saving this trip for someday," he told her. "But at our age, we are someday. If we want to see it, we should go." As Eleanor packed with her trip, she found herself humming, something she hadn't done in years. She caught her reflection in the mirror. The same lines, the same gray hair, the same softened jawline that had been there before she met Robert. But something had changed. The woman looking back at her now held herself differently, with her shoulders back and eyes bright. She looked like someone who had remembered something essential about herself, something age had not diminished but actually enhanced: her capacity for joy. Love at 70 doesn't look like love at 20, 30, or 40. It arrives with more wisdom, less urgency, and a depth that can only be carved by decades of living. As Eleanor discovered, it's not about recapturing youth or replacing what was lost. It's about recognizing that our capacity for connection doesn't diminish with age. It transforms, often becoming richer precisely because of scars and wisdom we carry. What Eleanor's journey teaches us isn't just about dating in later years. It's about never surrendering our right to be fully human at every age. It's about rejecting the quiet expectation that after a certain birthday, we should content ourselves with diminished lives. Lives where certain forms of joy, intimacy, and discovery are no longer appropriate to seek or expect. Some watching Eleanor might see only a widow who found companionship, but look closer and you'll see something revolutionary. A woman who refused to accept that her story was already fully written, who understood that every chapter matters, including those that begin in our 7th, 8th, or 9th decades. If Eleanor's experience resonates with you, perhaps it's time to examine what parts of yourself you've prematurely set aside, whether it's a possibility of romance, a long-deferred passion, or simply the courage to be vulnerable again. Share this video with someone who might need this reminder, especially those quietly living with loneliness they've resigned themselves to accepting. And leave a comment below about your own experiences of connection at any age. Sometimes, all it takes is one story to give someone permission to open their heart once more.